Welcome to this week's piece. So for this week, I wanted to do a challenge because I had one day to get a piece done, and then the next day I was packing up to head back down to my parents' house. Now, this was the wrong piece to do this with because it is fully MDF. It had not the best picture on Marketplace, but I went and picked it up, and then once I grabbed it, I was like, I'm not going to go through the rigmarole and tell this person I'm not going to take their item. It's fine. The full thing, like I said, not the best piece. It's MDF. The front two legs are like a resin type material, and there's next to no wood on this. The back leg is literally peeling off of it, and the top, this is not veneer, it is like a sticker. So it's not a great piece overall. But it is a great style, and great styles can still do well. So we're going to get to this, and I'm going to see if I can get this done in an entire day. So to kick this off, I'm obviously going to be taking up the hardware and giving it a good clean. I'm going to be using liquid sandpaper because I had it out in handy, and it is the perfect tool for something that you don't want to get too wet, and you don't actually want to sand anything because, like I said, there's no wood on this. It'll be a good deglossing situation, degreasing situation, and it'll help the paint adhere. To repair this back leg, I first need to get off all of the loose material, so that's just what I'm going to do here. Okay, now that I've ripped off all the stuff, I'm going to take my resin. It's equal parts mixture A and B. I like to do this is just a fun tip. On my cups, I will mark them A and B to match so that as I'm pouring and going when I do multiples, I don't accidentally pour A into the cup that I was using for the B. And same with the lids. As you take the lids off, sometimes you set them down in a different spot, and then the lids will get crunchy because they've kind of mixed in there and it's hard to get the lids off. So, you know, just mark those. You guys know I'm a big fan of marking things. Okay, so for this part, all I'm doing is doing a thin layer. You can use a little brush if you don't want to use your hands, but I've got gloves on, so I'm not worried about it. I'm putting this on, and you can see it instantly soaking into the MDF, which is exactly what we want. We want it to absorb inside of it. I'm also going to put some on the bottom so that it stops soaking up any liquid that gets put on the floor, because obviously this has been in liquid before. This stuff does get warm, just a heads up for those of you who've never used it. So you want to do this first step, because if you don't, when you go to pour to make things level, everything will bubble up and it will not go well. See, it's already starting to harden, which isn't great, but it's fine. I'm trying to hurry up and get it on the top before it gets too far gone. All right, so what I'm doing with the back and these sides here that are not sealed at all, is I'm taking my poly and a little brush, and it's a little bit time consuming, but I feel like it needs to be done. And I'm just sealing up the porous part of the MDF. It's a little bit like doing it with the resin, only it's obviously faster, far less toxic, and it's less expensive. I don't have to work as fast. It's just doing this. So it's not going to be as protected as using the resin, but it's still more protected than just leaving it bare. Okay, so for the drawer bottoms, I'm going to decoupage them. I wouldn't typically decoupage a drawer bottom, except for these bottoms are not in great condition. They're fine. The other one's a little worse off than this one, but they've got like the wavy because of where the track is. So things settled here and here. And it's, again, fiberboard, so I want to put a little extra protection in there. Now you can do peel and stick, and that's just fine, but this stuff, this is just a really thick fiber paper that I found at Michael's. I strictly picked it up because I like the pattern. I had no idea what I was going to do with it, and then I was like, oh, you know, it's great, but it's really thick, and then once I put the poly down and then poly over the top of it, it's going to be, one, give it a little extra rigidity, not a ton, but a little bit. And then it will also be, you know, a little more moisture proof, if you will. So yeah, let's get that in there. I always start with a dampened brush. I've already dampened this one. I'm just going to throw the poly in. I'm not caring about perfection here. I did cut it to the right size already. I will say that it's nice and easy to cut just paper because there's nothing sticky on it, which is great. So it'll be a little easier to lay in. Again, the paper is really thick, so if I have to pull it up and stick it back down, I'm not worried about it ripping. And it does feel like fiber paper, you know, that thicker, and you can feel all the fibers in it. Making sure I get a little heavier in the corners because I want to make sure those spots really stick down, because if somewhere was going to lift, it's going to be the edges and the corners. So. You could also do this with wallpaper paste. That would work just fine. Now I'm just going directly over the top. Again, making sure to get the edges and corners a little bit extra. And because I was noticing some bubbling as I'm pushing down, I'm just going to go through, add some extra poly underneath. and then use the brush to smooth it all back down to get all the bubbles out. But if you have a little extra on the edges because the paper expanded a bit, that's fine. You can either leave it if it doesn't look terrible, or go back in with a knife and cut it. I'm just mixing up the two parts again. This is all cured up and dried, and I did a tape casing around it. And then I can just pour this. And the tape does not stick well because this is MDF. So I'm going to have to watch it carefully. As this sets up. This is going to fill in everything. And then I'll be able to sand this and make it super smooth. I'm using my hands to make sure I'm not getting too many leaks, and I only have to do this for a bit until it stops dripping because there's just kind of a couple spots in the back that wanted to drip out, which I anticipated because I was using packing tape, let's be real. But then once this starts to set up, you can see it starting to turn white. Then I know that I can go in with my second pour and do that, and the second pour will not leak because it's been sealed up by the first pour. So that's all this was, and that built it up to the right amount of resin that I needed, to where it's just slightly higher than where it should have been. And then I can just take my sander, go in and sand that back down and get off all the excess resin around the edges and everything as well. As far as the front legs go, this was a super easy fix. I just unscrewed them. I did add a little bit of wood glue to them. I wasn't trying to be too crazy with it. It's just to kind of add a little extra something. This is actual wood, just the two edge pieces right there that attaches to, so the wood glue will help. It's not going to adhere too well with the resin, but it will help with the screw going in through the hole there, so I added some to the flat portions and then through the screw hole on both legs, and now they're super sturdy. Now that all the repairs have been made, I'm going to go in with Mellow White, and this is just going to be my base color. For these colors, I literally just went in with some things that made me happy and chose those because they're all going to get blended together. It's not going to be anything too crazy. And I know the orange looks like an odd man out, but I really like the brightness that it brings. So it won't be light there, but it'll bring in some extra brightness to the piece because all the other colors are kind of dull. So that's why I added in the orange. Like I said, it seems a little crazy, but it's totally awesome. So to start with, I'm going to do the second coat of white, and the reason I do this is because I want all of the other colors to blend into the white, and it will help them blend into each other just a little bit better. This is typically how I do my blends, not always, but it's a fun and fast way to get a blended piece. And it kind of gives you that like smoky kind of look. And then I'm going to do the deeper colors along the bottoms and the brighter colors along the top just to get a little bit of a fade in there. So it's not very consistent, but you'll be able to see it, the overall finished look, how it kind of gradiates upward. I've got two brushes here. You guys know, if you've been following along for a while, I'm not a big have a different brush for every color. Sometimes I do if there's a situation that calls for it, but for these like modeled blends, I don't care about it too much. You saw me just dip the purple brush directly into the Goblin gray. It's fine. I don't care about that. I want the colors to blend, so I don't care if they blend a little bit on the brush before I put it on. And then if I want to clean up the colors and make them a little stronger in one area, then I can take another brush and go in with just that color and really amp that color up. So I'm really just stippling all these on right now. I'm not exactly sure where I want to place everything exactly. I just know that I want to get it on and get it covered before the white starts drying, so that's what I'm doing. I'm adding a little bit here and there, seeing what I like, and then once I'm finished, I can go in and kind of swirl everything out and make everything blended together. So it does look a little crazy. If you like super texture, this is a great technique to use. I don't like keeping it like this. I just am putting it on like this. It'll give me a little bit of texture, help things blend a bit because I'm pouncing all the colors together, and then I will go through and actually do the swirl blend to get it really mixed up. And then if the swirl marks are just a little too strong in some areas, you can take your lengthening brush strokes and kind of smooth them out. And you can do this however you want. If you like that stormy kind of look, leave the swirls and that's awesome. If you want to kind of smooth them out and not have them be so hard, then you can go the horizontal and vertical, and that will really get everything really, really smooth. Once I get that side finished, I'm going to do the exact same process along the front, the opposite side, and the top. The front is a little bit tricky because I want the drawers in to make sure the blend matches, but I also have to keep pulling them out to make sure that right behind the drawers, that lip there is also getting painted as well. So it's a bit of a pain, but if these were like the sitting flush drawers, those are really nice because you can paint fully with the drawers in, and then when you're finished, pull them out to make the blend match, but it's fine. We got it handled. I'm going to seal this piece with the orange scented furniture wax from Chalk Mountain. I'm doing this because it is a quick way to seal a piece. I know that it's not going to reactivate any of the paint. I know that the MDF isn't going to be affected by it. It's still going to protect it. Typically, I wouldn't do a nightstand with wax on the top. I would do poly first and then wax. But again, I'm trying to get this piece finished in one day. So this is the route that we're taking. Wax is still very protective. It's just not as protective as using poly and then wax, which is what I usually do. Now the handles I just wasn't super pleased with before, so I added a little bit of gold rub and buff, and I'm using that to just kind of amp them a little bit after I clean them. The kind of corroded brass wasn't doing it for me, so, you know, rub and buff. Plus, now it's going to match the rest of the piece and be a little more cohesive. Now, I love doing rub and buff like this instead of having it be that super bright, vivid going in. If you do it after you've waxed the piece, it will really soften out the wax, because you can, I don't know if you know this, but if you take clear wax or whatever wax you're using to seal, you can actually take off rub and buff before it is set. So in the same kind of thing, it breaks it down. If you have it on here first and then add the rub and buff, you have a lot more play with it and it's a softer finish. So I'm just doing this all around the edges, so it's not going to be that really stark bright gold around the edges, but it is going to give something. And so I'll put this on here and then I can buff off all the wax and it will still be there, and it's still kind of more of a satin finish instead of the super bright shiny gold. So we'll do that around this edge and then also around the edges of the drawers, and then anywhere else where I think needs a little extra oomph. Now, as I said, this is me taking the towel and going in and kind of buffing it in, buffing the wax out, all that. And if it comes off just a little too much in certain areas, I can go back in with the rub and buff and add a little bit more. I had the stencil arrive while I was in Portland, so I just wanted to use it, really. Test it out, see how I liked it. I actually ended up loving it, and I think it'll be a perfect raised stencil. So for this, I just am using the exact same rub and buff, and I like it because it will then fade out into the rest of the drawer side since we put it around the edges previously. So it's on there and it'll stand out, but I don't think it stands out as much as it being stark from the gold to the paint. It's kind of the stencil to the faded gold that we have and then into the paint. So it's a little more of a transition. And then anywhere where it went over on the sides, I'm just using my gold brush and kind of buffing it in so that I can't see the stencil marks along the sides anymore. And then if it's still a little too strong, I can buff that back. Now I will say that when you're doing the technique like this with the rub and buff over regular wax, it does take longer to set up and dry. So keep that in mind. This will not be perfectly dried overnight. You're going to want to give it a couple days. Oh, hi, Taryn, here's Elegant Upgrades, and we've got our finished piece. So she turned out lovely. It's still not a quality piece that I can't change that just because of the materials that it's made with. It's MDF. If the top back gets exposed to too much liquid, it will of course swell up and not be great. The leg where we did the resin repair, you know, I've done that before in one of my videos, and it was the first time I'd done it in that one, and it worked out so well. So this one I got a little bit better at doing this. This is technically the third one I've done because the first video had the 2 nightstands, and I practiced obviously on one first and then the other. But yeah, that works so well. And obviously it's better than before because it doesn't absorb any liquid at all. It's just good. Downside is that resin is of course expensive, and it's not the best for the environment. And typically the products I like to use are all very water-based and stuff, but there's always occasions where, you know, you have to use something else, and I think resin is a great thing for this. It's just very easy, it pours on, and it really like actually absorbs into the material so that it kind of just becomes one and it's never gonna come off. So I think that's great. And then of course we did the, this is one of my favorite ways to use gilding waxes, is when it's kind of blended into the other waxes, so you can really see the sheen on here just with that, and it's on there and it's buffed in, and it just kind of gives like the subtle glow instead of the really strong kind of effect that you can get with gilding waxes when you just put it straight on. So there's that around the edges, and then of course I highlighted the feet, you know, the higher points, I did those. And then we did the same rub and buff. Again, these were like the overly shiny brass, so I just buffed on some of the same gold so everything kind of matched, and it toned down the too shiny, and now it's like that pretty satiny stuff. And then it, you know, stencils. And if I'm gonna stencil, I'm either gonna do a raised stencil or I'm going to do gilding waxes. I feel like those are the best ways to use stencils. I don't love doing them with paint. I have done it before, but it's not my favorite way to use stencils. These two ways are, I love them because they're kind of more subdued but still give a strong impact, and I really like it. So yeah, overall, I love this. I think it's beautiful. It's not, I wouldn't list it for very much just because of the materials that it is. I wouldn't feel comfortable. If this was actually a wood piece, then yes, by all means, you know, but since it was just kind of like a little, I mean, it was very messed up, but you know, it was not in the best shape. But now it's gonna have a whole new life for a long time. I mean, assuming they don't dip it in liquid. But yeah, so I hope you guys learned something. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was all done in one day, which is awesome. And by one day, I mean way less than a day, because I spent the morning baking bread and then ran some errands, and I kind of just did it intermittently throughout the thing. So this was a very fast flip, even with the having to deal with the resin and everything. It worked out very well. So I mean, it's nice because I usually give myself a week to finish a piece, and then a lot of times I can do an additional piece, you know, like a piece and a half, somewhere like that. But this was done in a day, and I think that's pretty good for something like this. Obviously on anything older that needed a ton of repairs, that takes longer. A lot of times you have to let glue sit overnight, and you know, you wouldn't be able to do that, but it's fun to be able to do it sometimes. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you, and I will see you next time.